We're here today for our fireside chat on the evolution of ideas, focusing on how to create and sell profitable and successful ideas. My name's Blaine Graboyes. I'm the co-founder and CEO of GameCo, and we focus on bringing together video games, esports, and regulated gaming. I started my career in film and TV, and then video games, and then esports. And it was really that work in esports that started about 8 or 10 years ago that led me to the ideas around bringing video games and esports to the casino industry. We were lucky to be timely, and we were the first company to put out skill-based games into land-based casinos in the US. And we've now expanded online into iGaming for regulated markets and esports betting. And I'm excited to connect with you, Mats, and have this conversation about how we create and proliferate ideas. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, really, really nice to meet you, Blaine. So my name is Mats Westerlund. I'm one of the co-founders of Quickspin, and I currently do mostly consulting and investment and some advising as well for different companies. I started my career in video games as well, and moved to casino games in 2006 when I joined NetEnt, when it was a very small company. And I worked with sort of evolving how to produce slot machines. At the time, they basically had none, and that turned into the core business of the company, as you may know. And then after a while, I left and started Quickspin together with Daniel Lindberg and Joachim Timmermans. And that's basically it.
That's great. I was just thinking, when we were kicking this off, how interesting and dynamic the world is. You're in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm in Joshua Tree in the desert, but we're able to connect and have these kinds of conversations remotely and have so much shared ground too. I remember when we first chatted, I think about a week ago, I thought it was really interesting that we both came from the video game industry and, found our way into the casino and regulated gaming industry. And, maybe it would be interesting for the people that are watching and joining us, just for us to, talk a little bit about that journey for each of us of, moving from video games into the casino industry and, maybe what each of us have just learned about ideas and business, pros and cons and similarities and differences between those industries.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I can start if you want to, but I think for me it was interesting because when I was working with the video games, I mean it was quite big projects, as you know. Basically, I had a team of 100 to 300 people that was producing like AAA titles, and it was a long journey to get a game ready. And I thought it was a lot of fun, but I never really felt super happy about it. I wanted like shorter projects, and then after a while, I got sort of tipped off about this job at NetEnt, and I figured, I mean, if I can produce video games, casino games, could be the easiest thing in the world, and it's going to be short projects, and maybe while sort of waiting for something more interesting to appear, that was going to be a good way to go. And I think, I don't know if you've had the same experience, but I mean, this was, 15 years ago almost. And back then, the technology for the casino games weren't, superior, I would say. And I tried to sort of make the slot machines more video game-ish, which I think you are doing better nowadays, Blaine. But it was a total disaster. I think that was one of my biggest fails. I think to think that I could just walk in as this big time producer and do my stuff and just, take over the industry. So I think I had a few years of just, missing the target, basically. We were doing decent games, but I learned over time that the casino player is not looking for video games in the sense that I was thinking they were, at least not back then. I think it's different now with new target groups, younger target groups. But also I realized that thing that I thought was going to be just a short step away from the video games and onto something else was actually the most interesting thing I've done in my life. After a few years, I started to understand casino games and slot machines, and the passion has never stopped since. It's like, it feels like I learn something new every day when it comes to slot machines, even though it's such a like a small product. And I don't know what you think, Blaine. It's been more recent for you to take this step to the casino industry or iGaming. So what?
Yeah, well, the two things you said really touch with me. One is that you thought it would be easier, and I definitely thought it would be easier too. I always say it's really hard to make a great video game. It's really hard to make a great gambling game. So therefore, it's just that much more difficult to make a great, as we would call it, video game, gambling game. And then, you also just touched on something that I think's really important that I registered as humility, learning something new every day. And admittedly, when I started making our first games at GameCo, I didn't really understand slot games or slot players, but also admittedly, I was a bit dismissive of them. A lot of my research with younger people had kind of touched on the idea that now that we had these big multi-line games, playing all these different penny slots, but you're playing hundreds of credits, that people didn't really understand the slot mechanic and why they were winning or losing. And as I've learned over the last few years, that is nothing further from the truth. People that play these games absolutely understand what's happening. It's that I didn't understand how the games were designed, how the math worked, how the symbols worked, how payouts were communicated, what you were chasing in a game, and the idea that you could actually be chasing something in a game that is ultimately randomly driven. And it really took sort of, for me, what I would call the art school process of creative criticism, of talking to players, going and playing a lot of slot games, spending time on the casino floor, and then with online casino, till I really understood how those games worked. And what we always say at GameCo, we have a Venn diagram that's on my office door of the motivations around video games and slot machines, with kind of like an arrow in the middle saying, GameCo's the center of that Venn diagram. And what I always say is it's about the thrill and anticipation of gambling with the fun and interactivity of video games, and the ability to create thrill and anticipation and entertainment value in slot machines is truly amazing. And admittedly, it's taken us and me at GameCo a couple of years of iterating on this combination of the pieces to find what we think of as the right combination or balance between those. But a big part of it was, as you mentioned earlier, the humility to recognize that it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be, there was a lot to learn, and that there were people out there like yourself and others that had really pioneered, the online and land-based space, and were just making these absolutely amazing slot games, and that we could learn from that to create better, new, different product in our category of video game gambling. So it was like that creative journey has been really tremendous, filled with a lot of ups and downs. Times you think you're making the best thing ever, and it turns out to be a flop. And I'm sure you've had that. And
Quite a few, yeah.
times that, and times that, you're not sure about something, and then, it turns out to be, really well received and a huge success.
Quickspin presents The Big Bad Wolf. Introducing swooping reels with pigs turning wild. The feature that will make the winning streaks go on and on and on. The free spins bonus is where the real magic happens. Collect moon symbols to have the wolf blow all houses down and get the rewards on the way. Big Bad Wolf blow you away.
When we started Quickspin, you can never pressure someone to pay for real money, because we're obviously dealing with something that some people may not be able to handle. But we really tried for the people that was joining the company to play for real money, and we did some sessions together, like Friday night spins at the company and so on, to make everyone understand that, like, why am I doing this sort of a near win sequence in the game, and how does it feel? Does it feel good for me when I play the game, instead of me being there all the time telling them, like, 1 millisecond less on that and blah blah blah. I think it's really good if people people understand it themselves. It's kind of like actors, I guess, as well. You've been in the movie industry, and I suppose you have actors who almost can direct themselves, and then you have actors that maybe need a lot of help, and if they can direct themselves, then I think it's easier to hit the target.
Yeah, well, what that makes me think about is risk. It's so cool that you would, basically risk your next 2 days of, food money to go experience the ride of the games. And, talented actors always talk about taking risks in a role or a performance. And we're both entrepreneurs, so we've both had the risk of raising and investing capital, and the risk of the responsibility to your employees and investors and stakeholders. And, at the end of the day, gambling is certainly a risk-taking activity, and understanding why someone would do it, not just from the financial risk-taking, but from the entertainment component of it. Just as an example, like, I don't like to ride amusement rides like roller coasters, because for me, the risk that anything would happen to me on a ride just isn't worth it. The idea that I would get injured or die on a roller coaster, that risk isn't worth it for me. But I love driving fast cars, and, not afraid to go 175 miles an hour on a racetrack if I can, because, that's a risk that I really enjoy. And for me also, it was about risking my own money playing games. And even though I grew up going to the boardwalk in Atlantic City, I didn't really grow up gambling or around gamblers in that sense. And so it really was only in sort of the second year of GameCo that I started spending my own money going to the casino. At the time, I was living at Palms Place, which is part of the Palms Casino in Las Vegas. So I was very lucky. I could just take the elevator downstairs, walk across the way and play my own games, put my own money in the machine, decide how much risk I was willing to take, sit and talk to other players and understand their drives and motivations. And for me, that was really what unlocked my understanding about the creativity and the innovation in the games, not just GameCo is making, but as an industry that we're making. And I think it's so interesting to think about, like, what is that creative journey? How do you and I and others as, game designers and producers come up with ideas, communicate these ideas? Because in many cases, Quickspin or video game gambling, these didn't exist before. So first of all, we have to ideate them. We have to come up with this idea. We have to communicate it to people on our teams internally and externally. You were talking before about the difference in a millisecond, which it's easy to dismiss that, but I think a millisecond in the games you and I are making is a big deal. That is the moment of emotion and thrill and anticipation in what we're doing. So, I thought it'd be fun for us just to talk a little bit about, how we develop ideas, how we communicate ideas, how we sort of parse through what we think of as good and bad ideas. Curious for you what your process is like.
I mean, it's I tend to do almost the same thing every time I come up with an idea myself. It usually comes from some kind of like alone time, and I'm always focusing on something else, and then an idea just pops up in my head. I can be in the shower, I can be cleaning, or like picking mushrooms in the woods or whatever. So I always need something close to me to write them down. So when it comes to my own ideas, that's usually how it happens. I don't know what sort of the start for you is when it comes to ideas. What do you think?
I guess I would say I'm also intuitively driven. I actually wrote my thesis in college on how Marcel Duchamp, the artist, and Albert Einstein, the mathematician, both used intuition. But I guess the other is I definitely get a lot of inspiration and creativity from experience, particularly playing other games. Looking at artwork is often inspirational. For me, I was a mathematics, sculpture, and philosophy of science major. So I've always been about mashing these different areas together. And we talked a little bit about that last time you and I connected. And so, finding ways to bring things from outside of our space to inside of our space. And then I love collaboration. A lot of the ideas at GameCo, definitely originate from me or other individuals on a individual, unique basis. But we've really started to try to develop a collaborative process. And I'm not a big believer in creativity by committee, but I am a really big believer in creative criticism and feedback and humility. And particularly around, for our games, there's something that I've described from the very beginning. And this gets back to what I was just saying of, in the early days, I didn't understand slot machines. Now I do. And I call it the disconnect between the mental model of how a player understands a game works and the math model of how the game actually works. And the funniest example I ever have about that is I was playing some slot machines at Palms one day, and someone was playing next to me, and we just started chatting, and we got to the inevitable conversation that many slot players have their own mysticism about how the games work. And with no irony, this person said to me, well, see those cameras up there? They're watching us play, and there's someone in a back room deciding if we win or lose. Mm-hmm. And I said, so let me get this straight. There's like 1,000 games here. So there's like 1,000 people back there watching you and I play, deciding if we win or lose. And he was like, oh yeah, definitely. That's how the games work. And that person had developed that mental model, which is of course completely not just untrue, but implausible. Casinos wouldn't make any money. And for GameCo, I think one of the big challenges that we've started to overcome is that disconnect between mental model and math model in our games. And I think that's where criticism and humility from a group comes in, because if you've designed the game, you know how it works. But now if you're communicating it to someone, a mathematician, an artist, a player, a regulator, an ITL, a partner, they have their own mental model of how the game works. And it's sort of understanding that and then finding ways to alleviate and align that disconnect between the mental model and the math model. And I think the closer we align those, the better a game is going to perform, because the player ultimately needs to understand what's happening in the game. And for me, that's a big part of the process around creativity and communication, is hearing from people how they understand the game works. And, you know, I sent you a link to one of our first iGaming games, and it's in no way perfect, but we're starting to solve some of these challenges around communicating, you know, how your skill is a factor in the payout, how the symbols communicate different wins, the fact that there is skill and RNG in these games. And so it's combining chance and skill for the player. But to me, that's all about putting your ego to the side and really being able to listen to people, you know, at each stage in the creative process.
I think you're definitely right there. I worked with like a lot of like game designers, math designers, basically, who were talking about the probabilities of things, and it doesn't matter if you show it like this, because the probability is anyway, I mean, on this side, and you're showing something else or whatever. And I'm like, I mean, the players, I mean, generally the majority wouldn't care about the math behind it. They just want to have a really cool experience, and as long as you don't like cheat them in any way, I think it's, I mean, you want to present the math in a way where it's interesting, and not just basically the numbers or whatever. And I think going back to movies, I think it's similar. I mean, I think if you watch a movie, like a horror movie, you can always think about the setup and how they play this music and they do these things and the camera is like this and so on. But you don't want to think about that. You just want to like dig in and sort of take part of that experience. And I think it's the same for the slot players. And I also think
you like horror movies?
No, I actually hate horror movies, to be honest.
That's why I was asking. I'm too scared to watch horror movies.
I was actually I was thinking about what you were saying previously as well as about the roller coaster. I hate roller coasters, but I love driving a car really fast. So I think it's pretty similar there.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that you and I shared, which is how has your process and style changed over the last 10 or 20 years? And I would say in many ways similar for me in giving people freedom to succeed or fail. But I guess for me a big one has being more vocal and straightforward in feedback. In art school, you learn the process of creative communication and criticism, which is, lead with a positive, but then, dig right into the criticism. And I guess for me, it did take me a while to have the confidence to be that kind of communicator where I could say to someone, great job, but, here's where it needs improvement. And not just a detailed, what I would call punch list of changes, because that gets back to what you were talking about of if you're just micromanaging everything, no one's learning. But instead communicating the punch list of things that you want changed in the game or done, but why? What is the purpose of making that change? Right.
The why sort of, I mean, I had to adopt it eventually because of that, and I think the why has made such a difference because now I mean people respect you more as well if you actually tell them why this should happen and so on, because then they understand the change rather than just producing it. I mean, if you just go and say, can you make this symbol more green? They're not, I mean, yeah, they can make it more green, but you have to tell them why as well. I think you're really spot on there.
I guess that kind of leads to something we talked about the other day when we were preparing for this, which is success and failure. More importantly, failure, and how each of our processes and personalities accept and deal with failure. And for me also, what I would say is the importance of failure. I've always had a saying, it's very hard to know why you succeeded sometimes, but it's often very easy to know why you failed, particularly in a product that you develop where you can actually watch people play it and talk to them and get their feedback. And when you keep hearing the same through line of feedback, it's pretty easy to understand, why you fail. But, also just being able to shoulder failure, right? It's not easy when you're putting so much into a product that you believe in and that you have a vision for.
I totally agree. And I mean, it's so important to learn from your failures and just move on to the next game and accept that it happened and just don't do that mistake again. I think it's super important. And I also try when I have like a product cycle, I try to fail as soon as possible. So I really want to prototype my games a lot before I even almost put graphics into them or anything. I just want to have like a math prototype where I feel the game, I play it. If I have the time, I would like to put them on the shelf for a while and then go back to them maybe a month later and look at it again and see what did I do wrong, what could we do better, and so on, to learn from that. But you generally don't have that time, so you just have to like move on and learn from your latest game, I think. But I think it's important just to allow people to feel that it's okay to fail. Because I think that's important as well. So people don't walk around and are sort of scared of coming up with ideas or improvements and so on, because they're afraid to be wrong. So I think it's good to have a culture where it's okay to fail when you talk about something, or fail with some graphics you did, or fail with whatever. So within boundaries, of course, you got to be finished at some point. But
I love the idea of putting a game aside and coming back to it a month or more later. I would love to have that indulgence as well. But that kind of brings up, and I guess just to, be really open about our industry, one of the things that I have found is I don't know that our industry is so great at supporting and allowing failure around innovation, partially because we're such a metrics driven business, right? In land-based, it's win per unit and floor average. In, online, it's having that top left thumbnail and, keeping that position. And I do think one of the things I'd love to see in our industry as a whole is finding more room in the industry to allow for failure, because that's what drives innovation and learning. And I don't know that I'll get that indulgence as GameCo is now transitioning from land-based to online. But one of the reasons I'm excited about that transition is, digital space is truly infinite. So I do feel like over the next year or few years, we're going to see online casino operators provide more space and leeway and opportunity for innovation and trial and error and failure. Because at the end of the day, that top left real estate is very valuable, the first icon you see, but having a page or a tab with new different games doesn't really cost anything. And hopefully we as an industry can kind of evolve to allow a little more space for innovation and failure.
I don't know how many times I've said it about one of my games, that this is going to be the best game ever. I mean, this is going to be amazing, and completely fails. And I've had a few games where I was like, this is just a filler. It's not going to be anything interesting. But I mean, we'll do as best as we can anyway. But we're not really going to push hard on this one, and then it becomes a really good game. And I mean, one of those were Starburst, who's actually, I mean, that's one of the best titles in the industry, and that was just supposed to be a filler, but I had a really nice collaboration with the guys in the team, and they had some really crazy ideas, and I just basically needed to get them right on track with everything, but they did an amazing job themselves. And I mean, we had like a really short development time, and it was really stressful. We fought a lot, but in the end, we were like, okay, now we're done with this thing. Let's forget about it, and so on. And then that game turns into something really interesting.
This has been a really cool conversation. I'd love to, we're going to keep it going personally, but I think for everyone that's watching us, hopefully we've, shared some things about ourselves personally and professionally, and, hopefully given people some ideas around creativity and making, new ideas. And we haven't touched much on profitability, but, I think at the end of the day, if you make great product, it's going to find a path to profitability as well.
For sure, I agree. And I mean, I almost wish that we were sitting next to each other at a bar right now, because I could definitely continue this conversation for a while. But considering what things are like right now, it's probably going to take some time until we do that. But I'm looking forward to doing that at some point, for sure.
Me too. Either over there, or There's a great Old West saloon right behind me.
That sounds
here.
awesome.
Yeah.
I think I'll fly over anyway. That sounds great.
Excellent.
Okay,
Well, it's
thanks a
been
lot,
great.
Blaine. It's been,
Yeah,
it's been a
thank you,
pleasure
guys. It's
talking
been
to
so
you.
fun.
Yeah, it's
I hope
great.
everyone watching us enjoyed as well. But I really did.
It's been great. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Be
Cheers.
safe.
You too. Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.